Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is a preview for Final Fantasy XV. The gameplay featured in this video is primarily from the recent Judgement disc demo released on the Japanese PSN market, but I'll be taking into account my other experiences with the game too, such as episode Duscae and the Platinum demo. There might be a few clips from Duscae as well. First up, I'm going to talk a little about the game's history. If you want to skip that and get right into my thoughts on the game, click the on-screen annotation here, or use the timecode in the description down there. Thanks. So what is Final Fantasy XV? Hopefully you know what Final Fantasy is, a long-running RPG franchise from Japan, wherein every entry is largely its own self-contained story. For example, Final Fantasy VI is not a sequel to Final Fantasy V, but instead features an entirely new cast of characters, different world, all that stuff. Although there are common themes between the games. 15 started out in life as Versus 13, a title that was supposed to challenge the elements presented in Final Fantasy 13. 13 used a variation of the active time battle system. Versus had real-time combat. 13 was based in a high-tech sci-fi fantasy world. Versus, in its own words, a fantasy based on reality featuring modern cities, cars and the like. In other ways, it harkened back to more traditional Final Fantasy elements. For example, 13 lacked an overworld, villages, and other features thought to be mainstays of the franchise. Versus, on the other hand, an open world game, had many of those things. Following years of a troubled development cycle, Versus 13 was eventually cancelled and reworked into the next mainline Final Fantasy game, 15. From what we know, 90% of the game is the same as the original Versus 13 concept. Some characters have been reworked though, or removed entirely, but the basic principle is still there, and at its core, Final Fantasy XV is a fantasy based on reality, and in more concrete terms, a road trip video game with 4 guys. The game starts out with the Crown Prince of Lucis, Prince Noctis, heading out on a road trip with his friends, bodyguard and personal trainer, yes, really, Gladio, his chef and assistant, Ignis, and his friend Prompto. They are on their way to see Noctis married to an oracle of a nearby land. The kingdom of Lucis, meanwhile, is at war with the empire of Niflheim, and things soon go sour. I've been aware of 15 since it was Versus 13, and I'll admit, I hated the game when it was first announced. I thought the concept of a Final Fantasy game being so modern and realistic was terrible. I absolutely hated the design of the main character, which just reminded me of Sasuke from Naruto. It didn't help that the announcement trailer was incredibly cringeworthy to me. It featured Noctis being all brooding and edgy and using sick anime moves to wipe out a bazillion enemies. To me, it just seemed like something a 15-year-old who gets bullied at school would come up with. A power fantasy with no substance or depth. I'll point out that I wasn't exactly a Final Fantasy fan at that point in time either. I had played 10 and 11, but that was about it. So that's how it stood from, 2006 to around 2012. We would get new trailers now and then, but nothing about the game interested me in the slightest. Then, in 2013, we got a new trailer. And at the end of this trailer, we had the fun moment where the Versus 13 logo changed into the 15 logo. Still, it didn't really do anything for me. You have to fast forward to March 2015 for that. That's when the first demo came out, episode Duscae, however you want to pronounce that. And it was this moment in particular that sparked my interest in the game. Following this, I took an interest in the game and began following it in more detail. I picked up episode Duscae for myself to have a go, and I actually enjoyed what I found. See, as it turns out, the fantasy based on reality idea worked a lot better than I had previously assumed it would. I know it won't be for everyone, obviously, but personally I enjoy the realistic world which then has high fantasy elements thrown in. I was anticipating a game with virtually no fantasy elements, judging from the initial trailers, but that wasn't the case at all. There's plenty of classic Final Fantasy enemies and themes, and even some of the locations appear to be very high fantasy, although we've still not seen too much of them. Something about it just clicked for me, and I've been following the game closely ever since. Subsequently, I've played through a bunch of other Final Fantasy games to better acquaint myself with the series, but I've been talking for like 45 hours without really going into the actual game, so let's actually talk about the game, the gameplay, and so on. And I'll kick things off by saying, by no means is Final Fantasy XV a game for everyone. Fans of the franchise might dislike the faster-paced action gameplay that it utilises in favour of the active time battle or turn-based combat system more frequently seen in the series. But then, at the same time, fans of action games such as Bayonetta or Devil May Cry may not enjoy the less complex and fine-tuned offering here. It is quite a hard game to explain. Words and even videos can't quite convey the type of game you'll be getting. That's perhaps the reason why there are currently 3 demos out for the game, each one drastically different to the last. It is a hard game to convey, but I'll try my best to break it down. Judging from the Judgement demo at least, here is the basic gameplay of Final Fantasy XV. You have an open world that you can traverse, fight enemies, do quests, see the sights, and so forth. Is this a true open world? Will you be able to walk from one end of the world to the other without any loading screens? Bizarrely, I don't actually know, but I'm inclined to say no. If you've played Final Fantasy XIV, that makes a very good comparison. It is less open world and more zone based. You cannot climb every mountain, ford every river. There are areas you can see but not go to. This isn't, say, Just Cause. I think different areas may be locked off with loading screens too, but I can't even say that for certain, as the demo is locked to one area. Although one player has managed to glitch themselves into an entirely different area, so who knows? I apologise if that's very vague, but they haven't been extremely forthcoming with that. And to make matters even more confusing, the director of the game has stated that at some point near the end of the game, it changes from being an open world to a more linear story-based approach. So it's very confusing. Something I can speak about in more certain terms, however, is the combat, and it is a genuine surprise to me how much the combat has changed from episode Duscae to this near-final version. In episode Duscae, you would assign weapons to different attacks. For example, you might assign the spear to your jump attack, the sword to your combo attack, and the greatsword to your parry. In the final game, you can freely swap between 4 weapons at once using the D-pad. The combat is flashy with a low entry point. When it comes to skill, you can essentially hold down the attack button and you'll do fine, and yet if you look for it, there is some depth there, albeit not as much as you'll find in a true action game. I believe that, whilst not perfect, they have given a very good approximation for the other games. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I played through Final Fantasy X, I essentially beat the entire game by just hitting attack constantly. I would just go attack, attack, attack. I didn't know or understand status ailments or elemental weaknesses. However, more recently when I played through Final Fantasy VII and IX, I took a far more in-depth approach. I would try and use all the most effective strategies. At the end of the day though, I could still beat 99% of the game's content by just hitting attack. And that's how it is in 15. They've managed to take that from the turn-based combat and translate it into real-time combat, where you can just hold down attack and win most of the time, but there is some depth there if you want it. Whilst you only control the main character, Noctis, you have some slight input over your party. During battles, a tech bar fills up, which you can use to issue commands to your party. Each party member has a few different abilities to choose from and unlock, and if nothing else you can use them for mad iframes. There are also link strikes that can occur. I'm not 100% sure on how they work at the moment. It appears to be semi-random, but if you attack an enemy from behind, or parry an enemy, there's a good chance that you will perform a link strike with one of your party members. There's a decent selection of weapons in the game. There's, off the top of my head, swords, great swords, spears, daggers, guns, machinery, and then royal arms, which are sort of unique special weapons that use magic. Oh, there's also the giant shield weapon. Yes, the shield is a weapon for some reason. I'm not going to complain though. And you also get two forms of magic, elemancy and ring magic. We don't know much about ring magic other than it appears to house some of the more classic Final Fantasy spells, such as death. Elemancy, however, is an interesting system. There are points in the world where you draw ice energy, fire energy, and lightning energy. Once you have gathered these, you can use them to craft magic grenades, which you equip and then throw. For example, if you put in loads of ice energy, you might get a Blizzaga magic. But really, the most simple way to look at it is to think that you are making magic grenades. You are crafting grenades with materials that you find in the world. The effects are extremely bombastic and, well, cool. If you're going to do magic, do it big and do it right. There are hardly any games that get this, but Final Fantasy XV and Dragon's Dogma are two of them, I believe. You also get a skill tree, somewhat similar to Final Fantasy X's Sphere Grid. Here you can upgrade your party with new abilities and stat boosts. You can, of course, try and focus on one aspect, such as magic, or team abilities, or building up your stats, but I'm not sure if you'll be able to create a magic-only character. The melee combat is still very much the crux of the matter, and I fear it will be a very love it or hate it scenario. Personally, I enjoy it and admire it, whilst also acknowledging its flaws. On the one hand, it's simple and flashy and easy to get into. In one battle you can try your best to do fancy moves and combos and so forth. Whereas in the next, if you're feeling lazy, you can just hold down attack for the most part. But at the same time, it does lack the depth and precision of, say, Ninja Gaiden 2. And this might be me, but I've been reading on various message boards and communities, and it seems to be somewhat of a widespread issue. The attacks in 15, the enemy attacks, have virtually no telegraphing. What do I mean by that? The way an enemy winds up an attack, giving you time to avoid, counter, block, dodge, whatever. I find myself often being hit by attacks simply because I didn't know they were coming. There are special attacks that do warn you by prompting you to hold down block, but your standard enemy attacks, they can be very hard to see coming and avoid. I don't know if that is intentional or not. See, I'm trying to play this game like I would play Devil May Cry or Dark Souls. Maybe that is the mistake. The turn-based games essentially force you to take damage now and then after all. So maybe we have to take a different approach to it. Maybe we don't play it like Dark Souls or Devil May Cry. Maybe we have to focus more on defense. If we are face to face with an enemy, maybe we have to assume they are going to attack and not be in that position. Maybe we have to do our best to attack enemies from behind or from the side where they're less likely to hit us. Maybe we have to walk to points to get out of the way of attacks. See, it's too early for me to form an opinion yet, but I'm just saying, from first initial impressions, I think me and a lot of other players are going to be saying out loud, why did that hit me? How did that hit me? I didn't see that coming. So it might not be a fault with the game, it might be how we are playing it, but at the same time, we can't really be blamed for that, because it is presenting itself as an action game. We're going to have to unlearn our Dark Souls, Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, Ninja Gaiden sort of mindset and adopt a different one. Is that bad? Maybe not, but it's something to keep in mind. All in all, the combat is mixed. It is very hard to critique because everyone is going to get something different out of it. How about the other aspects of gameplay? Exploration, driving. The car, after all, plays a large role in Final Fantasy XV. I know that quite a lot of people hate the fact that you do not have 100% control over the car. It is essentially on rails. You can swerve left and right, you can do a U-turn, you choose which road you're gonna go down, but it is not like GTA where you just get in a car, immediately drive off-road and roll over. Personally, I don't think it's a bad thing. As with the combat, then yeah, if we try and play it like GTA, then yeah, that's a bad thing. But if we take it as its own thing, I don't think that's a problem. It would be like saying, why can't I pull the ammo out of my gun and throw it at people in Call of Duty? It isn't the intended design of the car. You might not like it, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad. Besides, as for off-roading, there are chocobos more suited for that terrain. Plus, you effectively have infinite stamina if you time your, dashing right. I don't really understand why they've made a minigame out of that, but, well, who knows. But yes, if you time it right, you do have infinite stamina, so you can zoom around running like an awkward teenager. On foot, exploration is a little clunky. You can jump up ledges in that you can jump, but you can't climb. You can't jump, grab a ledge, and pull yourself up. There will be times where you inexplicably cannot fall down to an area you can clearly reach. There will be an invisible wall blocking you because the game doesn't want you going that way. It falls into the fairly common open world trope of you are effectively in a giant bowl with raised edges that block you off around the sides. I never found it too irritating though. I never found myself wishing I could climb this because now I have to take a long diversion just to get to the same place. But how is the actual world? The demo area at least is not very high fantasy and feels almost like an area from Red Dead Redemption. Your mileage here will vary. Some people will say it's empty and bland and there's nothing there. Other people will go, what's that building or structure over in the distance, and go investigate. I am personally the latter sort, as I just love exploring. I love exploring in MMOs, I love exploring in Red Dead Redemption, in Just Cause, in GTA, in almost any open world I love exploring. And I was satisfied with the demo's area, as it had enough things that had me sprinting over to stare at, enough dungeons I irritatingly couldn't enter because they were locked off in the demo, and enough items tucked away that I picked up, despite having no idea what the hell they were because it's all in Japanese. So far, most of this has been extremely subjective, for which I apologise. Let's try and talk more objectively then. Frame rate, performance, things of that nature. I was playing on a PS4 Pro, and there are several modes available, but for the time being the high frame rate mode isn't functioning as it still runs at 30 frames per second. So I stuck to the high quality visuals. The game maintained 30 FPS almost completely, which is good to know, but it did seem to suffer frame pacing issues. What does frame pacing mean? Well, I'll try to explain, but bear in mind I'm not a tech wizard or whatever. So, there are 1000 milliseconds in a second, right? And 30 frames per second. Frame pacing problems arise when those 30 frames are not spread out evenly, they are not paced evenly between those 1000 milliseconds. It gave the game a slightly jerky feel at times, but nothing that ruined my experience. I would really like to see that fixed on the retail copy though. Likewise, they are aiming for a high frame rate 60 FPS mode for the PS4 Pro. Who knows if they'll manage it, but if they do, that will probably be the option to go for. Or at least, when you're anticipating a lot of combat, you'll definitely want 60 FPS. When you're just taking in the sights and exploring the world, then you'll probably want the high quality visuals. And at least in the demo, you can change it at any time you want in the options. No loading, nothing, you just left, right, you're done. It would be nice if you could bind it to a button instead of having to go into the options, like in Halo Anniversary Edition, but again, it's not a big deal, that's really a tiny nitpick. Now, personally, I didn't experience any glitches with the demo, but I know other people are getting all sorts of weird lighting glitches, infinite falling glitches, AI glitches, and even in some cases being knocked into different regions by rhinos. This is an open world game, and like any open world game, there will be bugs. Your mileage with them will vary, and I imagine any serious ones will be fixed. Again, this is a demo, and there's still a couple of weeks till release, and there will also be a day one patch, so hopefully the launch game will be mostly glitch free, but again, it's an open world game, so anticipate bugs, save often. As for the graphics, they look good to me, they look great to me, but you will see mountains and hills in the distance that look like they belong in a PS2 game with really ugly, blurry, flat textures. So if you're the type of person who plays video games by sticking your face to the screen and screeching every time you see a blurry texture, anticipate conniptions. On a final note, I love the soundtrack of the game. The music that plays during exploration gives me insane Oblivion vibes, it's unreal. And there are excellent battle tracks, as you would hope and expect from a series so famous for its music. Incidentally, I've been to the Final Fantasy Distant Worlds event at the Royal Rabbit Hall twice, because even when I wasn't really a fan of the series, I love the music. I appreciate the music. So there you have it, perhaps the hardest game I can think of to talk about. Closing thoughts? I enjoy the demo, and I expect I'll enjoy the final game, but I know this game is very hit and miss. It's very love it or hate it. It's a Marmite game. It touches on themes I can relate to, and I enjoy the basic structure of the story. I absolutely hate the design of the main character, especially his haircut. I wish we could give him a haircut, or just shave all his hair off, but that feels like a rather trivial complaint. Can I recommend the game? Yes, I think so. Clearly a lot of time, effort, love, and of course money has gone into this product, and I think it shows. I know it's a cliche thing to say, but the game feels like it has soul to me. At the end of the day, I had fun playing it and talking about it, and that's all a game really needs to do, for me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful in some way, or at least entertaining, and until next time, you take care.
Pronto!